I want to welcome Donnatella Della Ratta. Donnatella had a career in journalism in Italy before deciding to take the dive and get a PhD. Donnatella joins us. Her most recent appointment was at the University of Chicago, where she was part of the Digital Publics group. Before that, she was at the University of Copenhagen, where she got her PhD in April 2013. The reason I know her well is because I was on her committee. So her PhD dissertation, which I have in hand, see how nice that PhD dissertations look? Nice, light, and portable. This is her dissertation, Dramas of the Authoritarian State, the Politics of Syrian TV Serials, and the Pan-Arab Market. What she did in her dissertation, I want to provide a little bit of background so she can move faster in the context part of her talk, is she studied television drama in Syria against the backdrop of the ongoing revolution. And she looked at, number one, an authoritarian state, which nonetheless has not only allowed but also promoted private production in television. But also she's looking at a regional market because most of the buyers and the funders are in the rich Gulf monarchies. So it's a very complicated kind of national/transnational situation. And one of the unique characteristics of Donatella's work is the kind of access she had. She was in Syria for a very long time. She had worked in Syria before as a journalist. And she knows most of the people she's writing about on a one-to-one basis, and I'm hoping that this will shine through in her colloquium today. She will also be giving another presentation as part of our symposium on April 10. Donnatella has authored 2 books and a couple of dozen articles, most of them related to Arab media and international communication. Today she's going to focus on a very specific television drama series and go from there to discuss what are the implications of cultural production in revolutionary times. Now, when we discussed what she was going to present, I pushed her to do something a bit beyond and in addition to the dissertation. That's what she did, and I look forward to listen to her. So this is a 1 hour and a half event, so she'll speak for around 40 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Thanks. Donnatella?
Okay. Thank you so much, Marwan, for the introduction. I'm very proud to be here today, and thanks all of you for coming. So since we are going to talk about television, I just want to show you a clip before we get started.
من رسل
سامع اللي سامعه وشايف اللي شايفه.
أكيد سيدي.
بدي صوت بارودتك أعلى كتير.
سيدي أنا نوس على الناس؟
حياة مضرة بالصحة يا ابني. استعداد؟ نار.
Okay, so this short clip that you just have seen, it's taken from ولادة من الخاصرة, Birth from the Waste. It's a musalsal in Arabic. It's a serialized TV fiction, which happens to be broadcast mostly in the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is the holy month for Muslim, and it has become the peak entertainment season for in the Pan-Arab market. Actually, even the advertising buyers in the region, they spend even 70% of their advertising budget on this season, which lasts only for 1 month. So basically, last Ramadan, which was in July 2013, ولادة من الخاصرة was broadcast. This is actually the 3rd part of a multi-season series, which started in 2011. That was the 1st season. Then we had the 2nd season in 2012. It is produced by a Syrian production company, a private one called Claquette. The main broadcast network are among the others, because there are so many, but I just want to point the main of them, like the major. NBC, it's actually the biggest TV entertainment group in the Pan-Arab market. It's owned by a Saudi prince. It's very important, as also Abu Dhabi Television, which was also the commissioner of Wilada Min al-Khazira for the first season, did broadcast for 3 consecutive years, as much as LBC, which is a Lebanese entertainment channel, which becomes a major player during Ramadan. And also Syrian TV and Syrian TV Drama Channel, who are government-owned channels, which did broadcast indeed only the first 2 seasons, and we're going to see why. So basically, Wilada Min al-Khazira, just to be like, go very short into the plot, the first 2 seasons were quite famous and also controversial because they were talking about, living in the slums and poverty and the abuse of power by the Syrian Secret Service. So it was quite controversial, but actually the most controversial one is this season, season number 3, broadcasted in 2013. As you saw from the clip, there is a very violent and corrupt also Secret Service officer who ordered a soldier to shoot at protesters. And this is pretty much what actually happened in Syria. People were demonstrating in a peaceful way. They even lack political leadership, and somebody from the secret police said, "You're gonna shoot at them." Now, I want to look at this 3rd season in particular of this TV series because I think there are a couple of very interesting things in this 3rd season. First of all, the most interesting thing, according to me, is that people are actually not only making a TV fiction which is talking directly about the uprising and how this uprising turned into a civil war. This is the first point, but what is even more interesting is the context of production of this season, which is basically all the actors, the writer, the artistic crew that you see in this season are citizens of a country which is going under arrest, so their politics, their lifestyle, their own security, it's implied in what they are talking about in the fiction. So now I want to just remind very quickly that making fiction in a time of unrest or a war, it's not unprecedented in the history of filmmaking. Actually, if we go back to World War II, we had Leni Riefenstahl, very famous German director, who attempted to shoot a movie called Tiefland between 40 and 42. Actually, this movie is infamously known because she used extras from Sinti and Rom ethnic groups, and after the movie was done, allegedly she sent them to Auschwitz concentration camp. Another example, it's here in this country, Walt Disney was commissioned by the US government a series of educational cartoons. One of them is very famous, actually, Prelude to War. The aim of these cartoons was to explain fellow American citizens why America was waging war in such a remote country such as as Europe. Although, and actually these cartoons became very famous at an audience level. But I do think that these 2 examples, although being very much into the, the idea of making fiction during wartime, they lack the peculiarity of Wilada Min al-Khazira. This one is a fiction movie, so basically it doesn't have anything related to the unfolding of the World War II event. This one is a cartoon, so it lacks the human agency. I mean, people are not involved. It's just a cartoon. It tells about the World War, but it doesn't imply human agency. So I want to look at Wilada Min al-Khazira in both ways, as in the context of this production, which is quite unprecedented. The plot is probably not the main thing, but the main thing is that how I want to ask how these people, the cultural producers that were involved in this, the making of Wilada Min al-Khazira, are coping with the situation, because basically they are at the same time witnessing an event, making sense of it, and also having repercussion on their own lives and safety. Also, I want to look at the project of Syrian drama, which is, as Marwan pointed out, not only a national project negotiated between political powers and cultural elites. It is indeed a market project. We are talking about a highly commodified market, so Wilada Min al-Khazira should serve also as a commodity on a market. So I want to look at the multiple strategies that these Syrian cultural producers adopt in order to survive, and I'm talking survival, real survival, in the market in terms of sellers. They need to sell their product, and to survive in their country because they need to make sense of the instability, also take a position, but maybe be aware that this position will be attacked from the powers, so they have to navigate the contradiction of this country. So basically, this is my main research question right now, and I'm going to use mostly, I'm going to refer to the scholarship in critical political economy of media to ask in this, the first part of this talk is going to ask how the political economy of TV drama it's going to be, if it's reshaped in the context of the uprising or not. And I'm going to look at the power holders that contribute to the making of the Syrian political cultural economy. I also want to look in particular at the national project and the cultural project which is behind the making of Syrian drama. And I want to connect it, and you will see why, to something that French filmmaker Truffaut called politique des auteurs, and Drabinsky defined it both in terms of politics and policy of the author. So I want to look at this project by asking what happens when an elite of cultural producers plan to produce a national platform of dialogue, because this is what Wilada Min al-Khazira was in the intentions of their makers. What's going to happen when this national platform, a sort of Habermasian project, you know, we're going to be all together, we're going to put actors, directors that think in very different ways, that some of them support the uprising, some of them support the regime, and we're going to be all together and we're going to use this cultural text as a way to test our possibility of talking to each other, you know. So it's I mean, on paper, it's a very interesting project, policy project of building a Habermasian platform of dialogue. Yet, I want to also look at how this Habermasian project failed, and why it failed, not only in the text, so not only in actually the messages that this TV series send to the audience. So it's a failed venue to conveying ideas of nation, piety, forgiveness. I also want to look at the way how this context, the project of making, you know, this platform fails even in the public debate, as shaped by traditional media and emerging social media platform. By using discourse analysis by Michel Foucault, I'm going to look at the implication being made by people that refer to reality, to ideas such as reality, realism, and truth. All the makers of this TV series have used this concept referring to other concepts. So I want to look at what are the connections between this concept of reality and realism and other connections and other concepts, and what are the politics that are implied by people when they refer to reality or realism. In the end, I want to conclude that actually a Syrian drama maker have failed what French philosopher Gilles Deleuze identified at the core of Italian neorealism, which is something that actually the Syrian drama maker evoke pretty often. We will see why. So Deleuze said that the reality in Italian neorealism, reality is no longer represented, but it's aimed at. There is a process which Roberto Rossellini, the father of Italian neorealism, defined it as understanding of things that unfortunately the Syrian drama maker fail to understand, it seems. And in the end, they also fail to understand what Zavattini called questioning reality, which means putting into discussion the social and political structure that are behind reality. So basically, the Syrian drama maker, they start from a point which is social critique, but at the end, they fail it. However, and this is my conclusion, by failing the national project, paradoxically, Wiladamin al-Khazira seems to be a very successful project in terms of commercial. I want to show how this failed national project is commodified by the biggest entertainment network in the Arab world, in the end turning the Syrian revolution into yet another commodity to be consumed and digested in the endless flow of what American political scientist Jody Dean defines as communicative capitalism. So this is the structure of the talk. I'm going to go through two parts and then a brief conclusion. That's the first part. Please just allow me to drink. So, basically, okay, the political economy of Syrian TV drama in the context of the uprising. So in my PhD research, I have defined the political economy of Syrian TV drama using this triangle. So the triangle is made by the Syrian TV drama makers by the complex structure of power, which is the Syrian regime. So it's not only one power, but a complex structure of intertwined powers that make the structure of Syrian politics right now, and then the Gulf buyers. I'm going to touch very briefly upon each of them. So the Syrian TV drama makers, this is very important to note that this is a generation of people who actually ended up making television, but they went mostly in the 80s and 90s to Europe, actually mostly to Russia and then to France to study filmmaking. They have a background in cinema studies. Usually when their cultural references, when you talk to them and you do ethnography of these cultural producers, they would say that actually they refer to an idea, critical view of reality, which is exactly what our Italian movement of neorealism did, as we saw before. American anthropologist Krista Salamandra refers to this cultural producers as doing a drama which she identifies as social realism. Again, this social realism is connected to Italian realism. It's an understanding of reality. I mean, it's the belief that this television should be shedding light on the problems of our society in a critical way. Okay, this is the starting point. But when they go back to the region, of course, they have to recontextualize what they have learned in Russia and in France and adapt it to what they have in terms of cultural industry in the Arab world. And so these ideas of social realism and Italian neorealism get adapted to a regional framework, which is a framework dominated by Egyptians. At the time, Egyptians were making cinema and TV drama, and so the Syrians end up defining themselves in opposition to the Egyptian. So the Egyptians were shooting in studio, the Syrians are shooting in the streets. The Egyptians were shooting with 2 or 3 cameras, the Syrians are shooting with 1 camera in the firm belief that 1 camera only, it's the only way to be realistic, which means the high vision is like 1 camera only. These are the technical characteristics, but the most important thing I have found out doing ethnography of these cultural producers is that they believe in something which we define as tanwir in Arabic. It's an enlightenment process. It's like an educational and disciplinary project which aims at bringing progress and education to the masses. The starting point of it being that enlightened minorities, namely cultural or political elite, should master this process. So the masses should be guided, right? This understanding of making media and making culture, I have found out, is completely in line with one side of the Syrian regime, namely Bashar al-Assad, the so-called reformist side of it. So basically, I have argued in my PhD dissertation that Syrian cultural producers and political, seemingly reformist elites, such as Bashar al-Assad circle, are bound by a relationship based on elective affinities. They like each other, they are comfortable one with another, and they do believe in tanwir. However, as I said, Syrian television drama, it's not only a national political project, it is indeed a media industry, so they should have the other side of the triangle, which is the Gulf buyers, paradoxically, actually, Syrian TV drama, it's a national industry which it's nurtured and supported by a transnational demand. So Syrian TV drama doesn't exist domestically speaking. Without a Gulf buyer, it's nothing. It's going to end up, you know. So basically the question is now that if this triangle works very well before the uprising, where I have found out that the pattern of interrelation between the three sides is accommodation. So basically the market wants what the political power wants and everybody's happy. But what does it happen in the context of the uprising when you have a crisis, a geopolitical crisis, when you have these guys, Gulf buyers, on paper against the Syrian power? If you look at the geopolitics of the region right now, all the Gulf countries are staunchly supporting the uprising, even in an armed way. You know, so they are pretty much opposed to Bashar al-Assad. So my question is, what does it happen in a situation to this triangle, to this balance of powers, when in the context of this uprising, right? The answer is, and I would use Wilada min al-Khazira, is that for the first 2 years, 2011, 2012, using this product, which is indeed one of the most successful on the market, so it's not just, you know, a cultural product, it is indeed a commercial one. Basically what happens is that this first 2 seasons of this Wilada min al-Khazira go very well both in a domestic context and in a regional context. Namely, Syrian television broadcasts it. Actually, Syrian censorship gives the authorization to shoot the drama, the TV drama, inside Syria. Then it broadcasts it. Then the Pan-Arab channels also broadcast it. And everybody just seems to be happy. And I want you to notice that the uprising is ongoing. So this TV serial, it's being broadcast, whereas the unfolding of the uprising is still, you know, ongoing. I want to argue that the first 2 seasons of Wilada min al-Khazira are actually exactly what Tanwir wants. It's not really, you know, something that it's actually showed as a. I'm gonna quote from what the actors said about this show. Wilada min al-Khazira, it's a show that increases the sense of responsibility toward the marginalized and those who live in the slums. It was able to cross the red lines and put at the center stage several key problems in addition to bringing social and human values. And another actor said that Wilada sheds light on the abuse of power and extreme poverty. Now, this could look edgy and taboo breaking. Well, it is not. This is exactly what Bashar al-Assad wants from Tanwir. So they are exactly in line. More than that, NBC, which is the biggest entertainment network in the Arab world, it's even commodifying this, you know, this non-controversial or seemingly controversial issue by appealing, by using actually social media. This is taken from the NBC website, of course I translated it. But so they are actually asking the users to express their view about, you know, corruption, poverty, and, you know, by raising questions such as, if you were the poor man living in the slum who cannot feed the kids, would you sell your kidney? So everything in the universe of like share of social media becomes commodified. And the problem actually happens with season 3. So the first 2 seasons, uprising is ongoing, nothing happens. But season 3 actually poses a lot of problems and why it poses a lot of problems. According to the writer of the series, Wilada min al-Khazira Part 3 deals directly with the events unfolding in the country, while previous seasons were just suggesting things. So basically, it might be true or not, but what happens is that Syrian censorship, for the first time, doesn't give them the authorization to shoot inside Syria. We're going to see the consequence of this. First of all, the director withdraws. So she was the director of the first 2 seasons, she withdraws. They have to, you know, they are in a rush because they need to produce stuff for Ramadan. They have to bring somebody in very quickly. Then, you know, the writer is arrested twice, not for a long time, but he goes to jail in Syria. Then the actors, they fight because, you know, you have so many actors that are actually a component of like, sort of a Hollywood stardom. And they fight because one is with Bashar al-Assad, the other everyone is against, so the set becomes a living site of struggle. New scenes are added, other scenes that were shot are redacted, more dialogues are written without asking the writer's permission, are written by the actors and the director. So it's pretty, messy. Now, I would argue that this is, the original project of the writer and behind this TV series was to create a national platform of dialogue. I have reminded you Habermas to let you understand that I really believe that a dialogue in Habermasian terms could happen through this, but eventually it does not. And not only it does not happen and it fails in the text. So you will end up, if you watch all the 30 episodes, you will end up being very confused because this serial actually sends the viewer ambivalent messages. Not only that, even in the universe of social media, of participation and like share, you have something like this. The scene that you saw at the beginning of this talk, it's actually the YouTube page, they have blocked the comments because it means that not only the actors within the context of the series, but not even the users are able to talk to each other in a kind of rational, deliberative way. So this is the way the Habermasian platform ends at the end of the day. This is probably the most far away things that we can imagine from a rational, deliberative dialogue a la Habermas. Now, I want to touch upon the issue of reality and realism, because actually in an interview with the writer of Willada in September 2013, a journalist commented that this TV series has been attacked from both pro and anti-regime sides in the name of the reality of the events unfolding in Syria. Some critics, too, have criticized the work for not presenting, I quote, the real picture of the violence that the regime has used against protesters, unquote. So basically, realism, truth have turned into highly contentious issues in Willada Part 3. They have been evoked by TV audience, TV critics, journalists, even Western scholars to assess the performance of this series, to say, well, it's a success, or no, well, it's not a success, it's a failure. So everybody is appealing to this idea of reality and realism and truth to judge this TV show. And the funny thing is that actually I have some of the declaration statement being made by the cultural producers. So according to the former director of the first two seasons, actually the credibility of season 3 is undermined because it's not filmed on real location. If we go back to what I said in the first part of this talk, the Syrians, they do believe that shooting in real location, it's a part of their Tanwiri mission, so they have to shoot on real location. So the moment that Syrian censorship says you cannot shoot on real location, it means the credibility is undermined. And this is actually what the argument that she's using to officially withdraw from the series. Then we know that there are so many other backgrounds. She's married to a general in the army. I mean, she couldn't possibly stay in this serial. But what she's publicly declaring is that, it's not realistic because of, we cannot shoot inside Syria. Also, interestingly enough, a pro-regime actor, Bassem Yahour, used the word reality and realism to justify his participation in the serial, because many actually were attacking him and saying, why do you stay? I mean, you are a supporter of Bashar al-Assad, why do you stay in this serial? And he would say, this serial is realistic because it reflects the condition of division, unfortunately, happening in Syrian society. And this argument resonates very well with Bashar al-Assad argument, which is that actually there is a sectarian war ongoing in Syria. It's not a revolution, it is a sectarian divide between the Syrian people. So actually this statement kind of reinforces his self-assessment as a pro-Bashar al-Assad guy. The other guy, who is an anti-regime actor, also a star in the TV show, he says exactly the opposite. I mean, he actually recalls reality to say, well, this TV series is realistic because every Syrian household has been turned into a movie by the regime's brutality. So basically, I'm doing this because it is realistic. So it's a paradox, but both sides, pro-regime, anti-regime, are actually using ideas of reality and realism to justify their participation in the series. And actually, going back to the pro-regime actor, he said, the serial is realistic because it focuses on the humanitarian side of the conflict, which is, basically what also the regime wants. The regime doesn't want us to understand the conflict in terms of oppositional politics. They want us to understand the conflict in terms of, just humanitarian issues, where you have corrupted power that are playing with the people, but there is no political statement behind this. So at the end of the day, these clashing ideas of reality and realism end up sending, if you watch all the episodes, a very phony message of, patriotism, nationalism, and an over-romanticized idea of Syrian people. So what are we supposed to do? If we have two sides that are not even two because everybody's switching from one side to the other, then let's trust the people. They will find a solution. And this is actually in a very moving scene, which is the end of the serial. You will have two mothers. It's very interesting. You will have two mothers. Both of them, their sons were killed by the regime, army, and the rebels. So they end up sitting and they say, we should find a solution. They try to work at a solution, which is a humanitarian solution for this conflict. But at the end of the day, the very last scene is one of them, she said, well, my son is a martyr. Your son killed my son. And she said, well, also my son is a martyr. Who knows where the truth is? And this is actually, unfortunately, one of the very bittersweet conclusion of this TV series is that a solution cannot be found. There is actually an impossibility or maybe unwillingness to decide who has done what, who is on the right side, who is on the wrong side. We want, the serial will end, and we won't know whether in the end one of the mother decided to forgive or to revenge her son. So it's an open ending. So in the end, I think that Willada fails to propose a vision, a reading of the conflict, that understanding of things. I quote Roberto Rossellini, that was at the core of portraying reality according to neorealism. This failure of unwillingness in, I quote Zavattini, questioning reality and fathoming the real correspondence between fact and their process of birth, shed light on the crisis of the Tanwiri ideology as a cultural reformist project and a political one, and reflects the frustration of Syrian cultural producers for having failed ideas such as unity of the nation, multiculturalism, non-sectarianism, ideas that were boosted in the past decade under Bashar al-Assad because of the Tanwiri idea. So basically here, Syrian drama makers, again, seem to have not to have understand the lesson told by André Bazin, as told by Gilles Deleuze, against those, I quote Gilles Deleuze here, against those who defined Italian neorealism by its social content, Bazin put forward the fundamental requirement of formal aesthetic criteria. According to him, it was a matter of a new form of reality. The real was no longer represented or reproduced, but was aimed at, unquote. So basically, according to the makers of Wilada min al-Khasira, the impossibility of aiming at reality, as Gilles Deleuze points out, is due to this absence of documentation. So the writer has declared that the lack of documentation and the brainwash of people have produced private truths. So basically, there is nothing that can unite the Syrian people because everybody has a private truth to believe in. And this absence of shared concept to unite the Syrian street, I would argue that they fail, in this way Syrian society fail at turning into an imagined community a la Benedict Anderson, and instead it would end up making national identities that are reduced to, as Marwan said in his book about reality and contentions politics, episodic utterances of nation and nationalism. So basically, this impossibility or unwillingness to define a nation or a national project ironically speaking, is turned into a commodity by the Pan-Arab network who is broadcasting the series. You will see, if you don't understand Arabic, but I mean, this is like, this is the way they portray what they define the sides of the conflict. So it's like, you know, everybody can choose his own little character. They are iconized and fetishized. And in the end, this is the way they are marketing it. So the fact that a national project has failed has been turned into a way of appealing the users, of actually calling them to interact in the like-share universe of social media, share ideas, join, participate, and so on and so forth. So I think I would argue that this way NBC has fetishized the conflict and contentions behind Wilada min al-Khasira. By recurring to social media platforms, it has turned potential political messages into, I quote, Micheletti, Stoll, and Forstall, lifestyle meaning system, unquote, and peripheral manifestation of personal choices and market freedoms in the endless flow of communicative capitalism, as defined by Jodidin. The Syrian uprising has been turned into yet another commodity to be digested and consumed in the endless flow of communication made up by global capitalism. And now a conclusion, a failed project of Here and Elsewhere. So in 1997, French filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard was asked by a Palestinian organization, Al-Fatah, to go to Palestine, where there was an uprising in Palestine at the time. They asked this very famous French filmmaker to go there and film the uprising. And actually the name of this film, which was a documentary at the beginning, was supposed to be Victory. Very interesting. But what happens is that Jean-Luc Godard goes there, he films stuff, and when he goes back to France to edit the material, Black September happens, just a few months. So the Palestinian uprising is basically crashed, and it turns into a failure. So Jean-Luc Godard doesn't know what to do at the beginning. You know, he doesn't want to edit a movie which is about a failed uprising. And this is a very interesting story because he actually leaves the rushes sit down for 5 years before releasing, I think, a masterpiece called Ici et ailleurs, Here and Elsewhere, which Drabinsky defines as a failed documentary, which has recovered itself in the element of the fictional, a peculiar mix between an initial sense of impending victory of the uprising and its improvable failure. And I would argue also that there is a very interesting, you know, sort of reminders in this text, very interesting film about the Here and Elsewhere, which is, you know, here it's France, actually the place of consumption also, because everything that is shot in France is about watching television, understanding picture, it's about the flow of capital, basically. And Elsewhere, which is Palestine, which is the place of memory, basically the place of a failed revolution. So, talking about Godard's movie, at the New York premiere of this movie, French critic Serge Danet commented that it is in the nature of cinema, delay between the time of shooting and the time of projection, to be the art of Here and Elsewhere. This is in 1977. So this delay as a work of art, it's evoked by Serge Danet, seems to be precluded in the highly commodified environment of global media and entertainment networks right now. The idea of the work of time, again, work of time, it's a word by Serge Danet, has inevitably been lost in the eternal present of the endless informational flow set by communicative capitalism, in the end, by being yet another contribution to this ever-circulating content, I'm quoting Jodidin, Wilada min al-Khasira seems to have failed its Here and Elsewhere. So basically, my conclusion, I started this talk by asking what does it happen when you have multiple strategies implied by drama makers who try to sell a commodity but also to sell a national project. Well, my conclusion is that, unfortunately, the uprising has showed, or fortunately, we don't know, but I mean, the uprising has showed for sure that the Tanwiri project as an ideology being negotiated between cultural and political elites in Syria has failed. However, at the same time, the impossibility or unwillingness of Syrian elites to define a shared national platform or project for Syria has turned into a marketing opportunity for entertainment networks which have transformed contentions politics into contentions of lifestyle, basically market choices and temporary exercise of power and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I saw Amar and I saw here Professor. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Professor. Go ahead. I think you first. Oh, you want me first? Okay. Two questions. I really enjoy this. It's fascinating, and I'd love to see the drama. But first question is when you argue that kind of Habermas in public sphere ended in failure when the comments on the comment function was disabled on the website. I was thinking, well, that was one of many possible channels of discussion, right? That how about other kind of channels and sites and arenas of discussion? People seem to be talking about this drama a lot, right?
Yes.
So can we sort of make the jump to the conclusion that because of that particular website, then we can conclude that Habermas in kind of public sphere didn't work in this case. Well, this is one question. If I can ask the second question is, I really like the idea about representation of reality and aiming at representation of reality. I'm thinking of the U.S. here. I would like to see a film or a drama, let's say about the Occupy, or about the Iraqi war that aims at representation of reality. But we don't, right? I haven't seen one. So in that sense, I thought this is something quite remarkable that was representing, and I don't know exactly how it's represented, but I certainly thought that this is some space for discussion.
Thank you for your question. So basically, yeah, of course, I mean, when I argue that there is like a project of Habermasian platform that has failed, I don't mean only the user pages. I mean, this is just one of the many examples I could give because I have a time constraint. It's probably also the more emblematic because you saw the clip at the beginning, so that's why I picked it up. That clip was a highly controversial clip because it was actually used by both sides, pro-regime and anti-regime, and to actually support their views, and it was shared on Facebook everywhere by both sides. But when it comes to a public, Facebook, I mean, it's a quasi-public venue. It's not completely public venue because you need to be friends with somebody to access. But YouTube, it's a completely public venue. So it's the place where everybody can go and comment and log in, and also anonymously, which is important. Because on Facebook, as you know, you should be yourself otherwise. So I took it as an emblematic example of the fact that even on social media, even on the most open platform ever, such as YouTube, where you can even comment anonymously, obviously the project of having a rational dialogue has failed, and that's why they had to block the comments. But of course, I mean, the failure is mostly happening in, as I tried to underline during the talk, it's mostly happening in the context of the production, because you see that, okay, the original project of this TV series was, okay, let's work all together. It doesn't matter that I am pro Bashar al-Assad, that you are against, but let's sit together and let's try to build something for our country. So this was the original project, but it has failed even within, first of all, within the fictional text, because if you watch it, you will be very confused, I mean, one episode sends you a message about nation, the other episode sends you, ends up confusing the audience. Then it failed in the context of the filming because they were fighting, because, they couldn't agree on anything. And also, after the broadcast, there is still an ongoing discussion in traditional media, Facebook, everywhere, And these people had to go justify themselves. I mean, all the pro-regime actors, immediately after the broadcast, they had to go to the Syrian national television to kind of, excuse themselves for having been part of this project, just like find justification, because they were scared. They even, received threats, They were accused not to be nationalist enough, not to love the regime enough, As much as the opposition folks, they also had to justify themselves, because the Syrian street, those who are with the uprising, they said, why are you so soft? Why are you portraying the regime in a way which is balanced? Why are you saying that there is violence coming from the regime side, but also violence coming from the protester side? At the end of the day, they are not equal sides, So this TV product is highly contentious. It's still, the debate is still ongoing. So I just picked up a couple of examples. But of course, I don't base the argument only on that YouTube page. And the other question you raised, I wish. It's a very good question. I don't know. I think it's still very, new what's happening, and it's very difficult to make sense of the event. I did see a very good film, Algerian film about the uprisings in the Mediterranean, which is something actually, and in fact, this Algerian filmmaker, he quotes Godard. He cites the movie in his movie. So if you're not like a film critic, you will not able to spot it because it's just like a citation. But indeed, there is this Algerian filmmaker who makes sense of all the uprisings happening in the Mediterranean. So it doesn't only talk about the Arab uprising, it talks about Greece, about Italy, So this is something that, I wish you could see it. But so far about Occupy movement, I haven't seen anything.
Just want to say one quick thing. I want to actually also, it's a reminder to thank Waldo and Corey, everybody who helped these.
Oh, yeah.
This is Donatella's own translation and the subtitles for
Yes.
an Annenberg
Yes.
production.
Yes.
So maybe at some point there'll be something available with English subtitles to watch. That's one. Two, this is going to be published on the Park website as an interactive document, and there will be video embedded in it.
Yeah. There was a question from Omar.
I actually also wanted to to ask you about the Habermas use in your talk. Like you've used Habermas sort of to shed light on the Syrian context and like the failure of that project. But what do you think like the Syrian context tells us about Habermas's theory in itself? Like is this ideal of or pursuit of this deliberative rational discourse something that happens anywhere? Like do we need to have a complete war to realize that it's actually bound to fail if it's taken?
No,
you know
definitely.
what I mean?
No, the Habermasian idea of rational dialogue, deliberative platforms, public sphere has been criticized all over the places for being very European-centered, white-centered, male-centered. We are all aware of all the critics. So it's definitely not only, the highly heated context of the Syrian uprising that is putting some dabs on it. But I was just like making it, because so I analyzed the discourse. As I said, I used Foucault a lot. I analyzed the discourse of the filmmaker. So what the filmmakers want to do and how they use the words, in their public statement or their semi-public statements on Facebook. So basically, when they say we want to build a national platform, and actually at the end of this series, there is a subtitle in Arabic which uses the word platform, even in the title of this TV series. So basically, there was an effort, a conscious effort made by the filmmakers of building this platform. And that's why then I connected it to Habermas. But not because I think that, the idea of public spheres needs the Syrian revolution to be proven like not really suitable to, environments that are not public cafes in Europe. Yeah.
So this series was popular among both pro-regime and anti-regime audiences, correct?
Or unpopular. I would say unpopular. Contentious. It was
people
like...
watched it.
Yes. Yes.
And whether they failed or not, there was some intention at the beginning to have this be something that could
Yeah.
spark some kind of national dialogue. So, and it sort of played to both sides, maybe too wishy-washy, but somehow sort of captured both, got to everybody, but still you're arguing failed to create any kind of deliberative anything. Do you think, based on this, that the idea of creating a media project somewhere like Syria that could serve as some kind of platform for dialogue among the two groups is just dead from the get-go? Or could some other version of this do something?
Very interesting question. So I do think that this is a very good example to say that Tanwir has failed, as an ideology. So I try to explain what Tanwir is. Tanwir, it's like an educational project, but also a disciplinary project being enforced and supported by these guys and also by the president. Now, for me, this idea of reformism has failed. It's very clear through this, but also through the politics of what's happening right now. So when Bashar al-Assad still says, we have dialogue, there is a political solution, this is not true. Because basically what they are doing, it's implementing fake platforms, but in the end of the day, the idea from which Tanwir started is that I am entitled to show you where the progress is, and you have to listen to me, right? So it's actually something pretty much far away from what we think as progressive politics or even democracy in our understanding. So I do think that Wilada shows that Tanwir has failed. So there are many other series that actually show that Tanwir has failed, but I think this is the most emblematic also because it's also a heavily commodified product. So I'm talking about something which was, as you saw, and it's still, actually NBC is still rebroadcasting it, so they're still making, money and social media on it. As for your question, which is, are there other venues where this national dialogue could happen? There might be. But it's not through this kind of seemingly progressive and edgy TV drama that national dialogue is going to be worked out for Syria. Yeah. Okay, I saw Sarah, Noor, Michael, and also Shaina and Lisa. Oh, yeah. We still have half an hour. It's okay. Yeah.
So, you keep saying, I just want to push you on the failure. Is it a failure because of the inability to reach a consensus? If we follow the kind of Habermasian model that you're suggesting, is it because at the end there was no consensus? Because that could be conceived as failure. And on the other hand, it could be seen as a success in the sense of, it didn't lead to consensus, but what it did lead to is that we actually are seeing, even with the commodification that you're talking about, and the market dynamics that you're talking about, we are seeing, and what you are portraying is, whether it's the producers, whether it's the people, the viewers, a dialogue about these political, social issues. So, yes, maybe from one perspective it failed, but from, failure depending on what kind of endpoint you expected in the beginning. And then just another small question is the idea, you started by saying that it kind of focused on the slums, on poverty. So where did that class discourse, what happened to that? Because for me that was one of the most interesting, in Syria, but also in Egypt, we started seeing the kind of fetishization of the slum, people selling their organs, all of that kind of. So where did that go?
Okay. Thank you for your question. So, the first thing, yes, you're right. Actually, I think that what actually Lisa Wedin, political scientist, who is an expert also in Syria, she actually, when she writes about the Ramadan TV series, she said, there is the performative nature of them. So they perform, that's the value of this series, which is, they perform the census. And by performing this, they end up building a collectivity that we now can call Syria upon this agreement. So there is definitely, the performative values of this series. But, it's like, I don't think consensus is quite a strong word. I don't think the meaning of the issue was like, yes, let's reach consensus through a soap opera. But the issue since the get-go was, let's sit and try to argue in a kind of civil way, in a rational way. That's actually why I quoted also Habermas, not really for the consensus part, but for the rational, deliberative platform of dialogue, which has failed, I think. Because if you read, if you see the statements, the way they interact, they won't be able to work together anymore. They kind of, especially the director and the writer, they are like the way they attacked one at each other. It's really not definitely a rational way of handling the issue. So I think the goal at the beginning, according to their public statement, was to build a rational platform of dialogue, was to show that, yes, as Syrian, we can still argue. And actually, there is a very interesting scene which we translated and subtitled with Cory. So we're going to put it on the website. It's a very interesting scene when you see a teacher, so somebody who is coming from this kind of cultural elites, trying to argue with a group of militia that are ready, to fight a civil war, who are his former students. And he's trying to argue in a very rational way that they should not pursue sectarian killing because they have no evidence that the revolution started as a sectarian war, right? But at the end of the day, he fails. So even in the text, in the fictional text of the series, you have this failure of, rational dialogue. At the end of the day, violence. And the only way to find a solution, as I said, it's like having the two mothers agreeing on an emotional sort of piety and forgiveness, but it's not definitely not a rational dialogue, definitely not politics, not deliberative politics, but just, a very phony idea and romanticized idea of forgiveness. As for the second question, what happened to the slum? The slum issue, which is a common, even worn-out topic in Bashar al-Assad Musalsalat production for the past 10 years, it is indeed very much present in this show, but mostly in the first two parts. Okay, so you would see also the two different sets, because you have one part of the story which is set up in the slums and the other part in the upper echelons of the regime where you have corrupted businessmen. So you can see actually quite a lot. And that's why the first two seasons were much less controversial, because they were just like something maybe more dairy, a little bit more dairy, but still pushing this pattern, which is a pattern that Syrian drama has been pushing for the past 10 years. The third season doesn't really focus on a class issue, which I think it's a mistake also, because there was a class matrix in the uprising. It ends up saying, there are bad guys on the regime side, but also good guys. There are bad guys on the protester side, and also, it basically blurs the line between the two, and unfortunately forgets about the class matrix, which I think was very interesting in the first two seasons. Yeah.
I'm still trying to articulate my question as I go, but one of the things to start off with, as somebody who doesn't study or know this area of the world very well, I found it somewhat amazing that the reaction to doing season 3 was to say you can't film in Syria, but but airing it was okay. And so how did that? This feels like, and I think it's connected to Movine's question, that you don't see real-time dramas about issues that would be as controversial and dramatic as a revolution in the United States. How did that happen? How is it possible? I would have thought that they would have just said, shut it down. And why is that not?
So, basically, this is the very nature of Syrian drama as a national industry being supported financially by a transnational demand, which is the Gulf. So basically, they didn't give the Syrian producers the authorization to film inside Syria. But indeed, they broadcasted the series on the Pan-Arab networks. So Syrian television did not broadcast the third season.
Okay, that's
okay.
important, yeah.
So it's
that's
not,
the
yeah.
advantage of the way
The
in
first
which-
2 seasons, they were broadcasted by Syrian television and also authorized, but the third season failed to get the authorizations and therefore was not broadcast on Syrian TV.
And the more substantive question, and I think it's a theme that's running through a lot of these questions, is I get your emphasis on this having failed as a deliberative project, and it may be that in part it's because we have not seen enough of the series, but the one scene you did show us, which as I understood it was a scene in which a government official orders his soldiers, one of whom clearly was uncomfortable doing it, to shoot the protesters. That also seems like a pretty dramatic statement for a series that's being broadcast as that's going on in the country.
Yes.
And so, is what you're saying in part that if we were to watch the whole series, that what we would see is not just a kind of a thoughtful, or this is complicated and there are structural issues underlying it, but also both noble and atrocious actions on both sides, that is kind of what art almost always deals with, really good art even, deals with complicated issues. Because in the United States during World War II, the kind of propaganda films that you were talking about, the U.S. government commissioned well-known American directors to do propaganda films, and they commissioned Alfred Hitchcock. And Alfred Hitchcock produced a few films that the government never used because when they saw them, they came away thinking you couldn't really tell who the good guys and the bad guys were. And so, that's one way of looking at what's going on.
That's art.
The other is that what you're seeing here is a real kind of lowest common denominator, turned into personal drama rather than more political drama. Is that what you say is going, if we were to watch the whole thing, and obviously we'd each interpret it a little bit differently, but that they failed in part because rather than really address the issues in complicated ways, they turned it into who's a good guy and who's a bad guy.
Yeah, also, if you think that as being a TV fiction, this is a collective work, right? And also in this very situation where you have actors writing dialogues and the directors cutting scenes that the writer had previously written, So there is always, it's a text which has been reworked by so many people with so many different understanding of politics and of reality that at the end of the day, it ends up sending a very ambivalent message, and I would say confusion in the viewer.
Well, ambivalence and confusion, just to push a little bit, they seem to me two really different things.
Yeah, you're right.
You could imagine that being something you want to, that, again, people have different views, but ambivalence could be a useful emotion to feel. Confusion or kind of catharsis or whatever else those might not be so positive.
I think, yes, you're right. So at the end of the day, I think it ends up sending confused messages,
so
and also because it doesn't, since it cannot appeal on it cannot aim at reality because of being such a collective and messy. Then, since it cannot aim at reality, it ends up like sending just like very phony, void messages based on, romanticized ideas. So, for example, we don't have any politics, so let's go back to our people. But who are the Syrian people at the end of the day? The mothers. So that's what you get at the very end, that, there is no solution, let's just go back to our mothers and try to figure out something. That's,
So thank you, that was a really nice talk, and I love that you used the Habermasian notion of the public sphere for it, because the whole notion of the Tanwiri project is very modeled on the Habermasian notion of elites leading everyone's thoughts. I watched the show, not all of it, but definitely the third season, and we all left with this notion of what is going on. I literally remember saying, what the hell, when I watched it. Practically because Syrians are used to this Tanwiri project of, you hold my hand, you steer me towards a certain argument that then is rationally supposed to, convince me. And it seems like why you're saying it failed is because the whole concept of the Tanwiri project as an elite leading people into some conclusion has failed.
Yeah.
It's almost like they've decentralized the discourse into a complete mess of the show has become a floating signifier for everybody.
Yeah.
So there's no consensus, I agree with Sara, like there's no consensus, but then like if you model it on the Habermasian notion of public sphere, then there has to be consensus. And there has to be an elite leading the consensus. But this one leaves it so every single viewer can draw an entirely different conclusion.
And that's why I think it was very smart from NBC point of view to frame it this way. You know, we don't know no one knows where things are going. So why don't you share your opinion? Why don't you tweet us? Why don't you Facebook us? You know, it's a way actually, this is the teaser, you know. So actually it's a very clever marketing strategies that they are using by exploding this confusion that you find in the text, by asking the viewers to, you know, jump on it.
And specifically the example you used at the end with the mothers, like we have moved from having rational arguments to resorting right back to the emotional argument of I don't want to lose my child, which is what, you know, the current case with the Syrian revolution is no one can talk. There's no discussion at all. So, I was wondering what, you know, based on that, what you thought of like the public sphere and how this is
I
sort of an example of how
I think you're right. I mean, definitely. I mean, Tanwir, it's an ideology which is very much related to idea of elite, whether cultural or political elites, and so it fits perfectly with the Habermasian idea. Yeah. Lisa,
I think it's really an interesting piece of work, and I just wonder if you really need Habermas, and if you really want to, you know, put all your eggs in the commodification basket. I think that those critiques are definitely there, but the part of your talk that I found totally fascinating is when you were talking about the background of these TV makers themselves, and the training that they did in Russia and Europe, and then they returned. And in the midst of a complete situation of uprising and then warfare, continued to make this work and continued to insist on telling these stories and committed to a kind of aesthetic of social realism and neorealism. And so it seems to me that it would be a great opportunity to talk about them as kind of organic intellectuals and the intellectual labor of the TV maker who is trained in this way and returns to country to then try to make sense of what's going on. So I would suggest, like, you know, kind of, I can understand the temptation to want to talk about Habermas and the deliberative dimensions of TV narrative like this. But I also think, you know, it's possible to think about creative labor as intellectual critique, and that's the most really fascinating thing about the material to me. I did appreciate your reading and everything, but I would just challenge you to maybe think through whether there's a kind of, you know, intellectual claim being staked out in this TV drama that needs to be thought about. And that way I also think, you know, it's possible to think about the voices of the region as the intellectual contribution rather than always having to resort to Western philosophers.
Well, you don't know how much I tried. Actually, I mean, I'm quite familiar with the region. I mean, and honestly, I discussed this TV show with even philosophers in Syria, like Yusuf Salama, for example, who is a quite prominent professor of philosophy in Damascus, and other people who are part of this educated elite, whatever, and nobody was able to come up with a non-Western reference. Nobody. They say, you know, I actually pretty much agree with the writer when they say, you know, our past has been erased by totalitarianism and we lack common understanding and they brainwashed us, so there is no, I mean, of course there are local intellectuals, but if we talk about this example and TV drama in general, I have to say that I tried so hard to have cultural references taken from the local production, and it actually didn't work out because they do identify themselves they make the connection between their own cultural background and Europe mostly, because these people studied in Europe, in mostly, as I said, in Russia and in France. And so they have like this background, which is mostly related to socialism. And of course, yeah, they are like, there is something like engagement, and they are committed, and there is an intellectual stance in it. But I'm afraid that this is exactly the same intellectual stance that is required by this power, by this seemingly reformist power that Bashar al-Assad represents in Syria. That's exactly what he wants also. I'm not saying that he's indoctrinating them or they are doing it to please him. Actually, on the contrary, one of my arguments is in my PhD thesis is that there is this sort of elective affinities between them. You have also to consider, it's true that they studied in Russia. It's true that they have these references of social realism and Italian neorealism, and they are most of them Marxists, but you should have seen them in the past couple of years before the uprising. This was a highly, there is a stardom system. These people are like Hollywood. You go, I did my ethnography in Syria. I went to parties with them, dinners with them. They go to markets. They go to Cannes market. They go to Dubai market, Istanbul market. They are players in a market. I don't want to overplay the commodification because I come obviously from a critical theory of political economy. But I have to say that there is an industry over there that is making money. And these people are not only, they actually, yes, they do tell stories from the slums, but then they have limousines.
I just want to say one thing. You keep saying Russia, Russia, Russia. A lot of these went studied
on
Soviet Union scholarships, and there's a difference.
Sorry.
Right?
Soviet Union, yeah.
But some of the more recent, some of the younger crowd did not do the Soviet scholarship thing.
Yeah, of course. No, that stopped in '89. So, for example, the director of this, Wilada Min al-Khazira, did not study, but he was a former student of Haysam Aqi, so somebody who did study, But basically, yes, the new generation didn't go to Soviet Union or Russia. But
it also sounds like you're not imposing the Habermasian public sphere model on this, that you're arguing that and showing that is the model that they are using for what they're trying to describe this as. Is that correct?
I think Tanwir, it's pretty much like a self-definition that they use in a positive way. I mean, they of course they are like they do believe that this is the right way to, and it's not only Syria. There is a very good book from Lila Abulghad. She's an anthropologist at Columbia, and it's about Egypt, and she says pretty much the same things about Egypt. Although she talks about the 80s, so it's a pre-satellite market, but still she talks about these intellectuals that are kind of going the same direction with power because they believe in socialist ideals.
Shannon's been waiting.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your talk, Donnatella. I was wondering if you could just speak more about two smaller points in your talk. One about the different sites of struggle that went on during production and editing, and how that might relate to the representational politics of realism, because you were giving us some different quotes and showing how realism is contested and interpreted differently according to various writers and producers. But I wonder how that relates to the actual production process, in that are there places that are considered, that don't fit into these frameworks of realism? Are there things which are actually somehow not realistic or not able to be portrayed as the realism they're pursuing? And how do those challenge, what their vision is, what their goals are, and also kind of say that realism itself is an aesthetic category, and we need to see also what is beyond that particular category.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about some scenes that were redacted or added, because this is a highly contentious issues between the filmmakers. So one scene that was actually added by the director when the writer was in jail is actually one, we edited it, but when you saw like the first clip that I showed, when you have this this sign written which says at the end of the scene.
I'm wondering how many people noticed that.
Yeah, maybe you didn't. Okay.
The caption?
Yeah, the caption. Yeah, maybe we should just. Yeah.
ناصر
مرسي
سامع اللي سامعه وشايف اللي شايفه.
اكيد سيدي.
بدي صوت بارودتك اعلى كتير.
سيدي انا نوس على الناس.
حياة مضرة بالصحة يا ابني. استعداد؟ نعم.
Okay. So now here I actually put something because I wanted you to see it, but this is something that you see at the very beginning of each episode. So this says this series is not a TV documentary, but it's an imitation. Okay, so using the word imitation was very controversial because actually this caption was added by the director, and the writer immediately, the first day of the broadcast, if you go on his Facebook pages, you will find a statement that he released. He said, I'm not responsible for this thing. So basically, he would argue with the director who added this thing, that the fact that he didn't have the courage to say, you know, this is actually, why should we add this caption? To say, well, you know, don't read in this, don't try to understand who is this character, who is Bashar al-Assad, who is this other guy, because by the end of the day, this is just an imitation. So it's kind of softening the argument that the series makes, if any. And so this was, for example, something that he didn't like. Also, the director added a mashup between real footage, which I wanted to show, but I didn't have time, but it's going to be hopefully up on the website. So a mashup between the real footage taken from actual demonstrations in Syria and the life of these characters. So he made a mix between fiction and real footage, right? And the writer did not agree because he said, again, you are messing up things, you know, you're blurring reality. So in the name of reality and realism, he said, this is cheap TV making. Why would you add, you know, real footage and mix it with fictional stuff? So this was a highly contentious issue. Another one was, for example, one of the characters, she's a female from Aleppo, and she ends up in the last scene, one of the last scenes in the last episode, she lost her husband because her husband actually went to join the Syrian Free Army, so she lost touch with him. In the last episode of the series, you would see her going to Beirut, and in a scene where you have, you know, the beautiful Beirut with the seaside and the Corniche, as opposed to the hell that Syria has become. And she meets somebody and decides to be a server, to work at somebody's place, you know, to be a maid. Yeah, a maid. So basically, and this is kind of, this is what the director did, as opposed to the scene that was filmed when the writer was on location, which is that she ends up joining the Free Army too. So you would see her at a checkpoint of the Syrian Free Army, giving her ID card and saying, I mean, I want to join the Free Army. So for example, the director deleted this scene and changed it. And this was also highly controversial because the writer said, this is not possible. And why her husband is in the Free Army, she goes to Beirut and she enjoys so they actually used this idea of reality and realism, which is of course connected to an understanding, a political understanding of the situation, to assess, the failure of the TV series or the success of the TV series. But it's still highly controversial. If you go to their Facebook pages or you Google in Arabic, you will find a lot of debates going on between them.
Just a very quick question. that I hope connects a lot of questions. So I'm looking at my notes and I'm thinking of the issues that have been raised. What Michael said about ambivalence versus confusion, the issue that Sarah started us with, success. What Lisa said about creative labor being a kind of intellectual / political critique. Shayna's question about realism, and I'm thinking one of authorship, the issue of authorship, right? Because in many ways in Arab drama there is no executive producer like you have here in the U.S., right? So it used to be the writer, whoever does the screenplay is the author of the serial. Now directors have become a bit more powerful and producers are coming in. And so the methodological question is this. So you were in Syria when things started, and you did your ethnography, you hung out on production sets, you hung out at the receptions afterward when people say things they might not say it, on the job. You were in the country, people said things, and then you left. And then a lot of this is like shifting sands, basically. So you have the director who was with one position the first 2 seasons, who abruptly is out of the picture, but who's still talking about it. So how do you account for, we were talking about ambivalence, right? Shifts from one side to the other are technically not ambivalence, right? But how do you appreciate and capture these shades of gray in these small shifts that actually make the richness of this what it is, I think. So other than, you're obviously stalking everybody on Facebook, right? So other than this, if you go and can you talk to them again? Can you do what some of us think of as follow-up interviews? You obviously can't show up again in Damascus or Aleppo, right? but so methodologically, how do you capture the shift? If you did your ethnography at the very beginning, before some of the shifts happened, and before some of these ambivalences became a matter of public discourse and fodder for public debate?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, I cannot go back to Damascus, otherwise I would end up in jail. But I do talk to these folks on a daily basis almost. I mean, they are like, because I've been in Syria for many years, as you said, also before doing my PhD as a journalist. So actually some of these people are even, friends. I mean, we have developed a friendship relationship. So we actually do follow up. I mean, many of them now are in Lebanon. Others are in Jordan, others are in Dubai. So it's actually, there is a diaspora, but they would talk to you. I mean, I talked to them before doing this talk. I mean, I've been talking to them many times. To the director doesn't want, he would talk to me, but he doesn't want to elaborate that much on this because he thinks that it's too controversial. But everybody else would definitely, some of them, I saw them in Lebanon.
But it's still an epistemological minefield. If a director on his set who's talking to you as he's shooting, the cast is there, you're actually seeing what's going on, then you're talking about it, then you're following up when he or she has had a few drinks and would start saying things that they might have said when fully sober. It's very different from, so you capture that moment, right? The follow-up is, he's on the run in Dubai. Okay, he might be staying at a nice hotel, but it's a completely different experience.
You're right. But that's why I said I started the talk by saying that I've used the Foucault discourse analysis here, because actually what I'm interested to look at in this situation is the way they frame a public discourse about it. So not really to do an ethnography of these producers, which I did already. It would be interesting, of course, to do a post-uprising ethnography in a very different situation. But yet, in this very situation, I'm interested to understand why they say something publicly about this, and how do they use the concept of reality, realism, and which politics it implies. And that's why I used Foucault. So. But I think, it would be great to do a post-uprising ethnography using multiple sites, because now Damascus is like, when I did my ethnography, Damascus was like Hollywood, was the place where you would go if you studied these things. But now it's like a little bit mostly happening in Lebanon, but also in Dubai and sometimes in Jordan. So it's much more complicated to, Thank you for the question. It was,
I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah.
If it's medium length.
It's probably like a small suggestion rather than question.
Yeah, sure.
It would be interesting. The blending of reality and fiction that you're kind of addressing in this. It would be interesting to also follow the kind of like the interviews on that talk shows that these actors and producers have, and how it always comes back to them talking about the uprising and their political stance, and so like kind of across different genres, tracking the life world of the revolution in their own
Understanding.
in their own life as artists, as you know, as public figures across these different TV genres. So even when they appear on like guest talk shows or.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.